time in Seattle, and I'm so happy to see so many people show up on a Wednesday night in Seattle. I know traffic and all, parking is all hard, but thank you for making it. We have an excellent panel here today. I also want to share that this is the first time we're putting this together in Seattle, and Pulumi is our proud co-sponsor who has also helped with this panel as well, so shout out to Pulumi. I have great panelists here, and we'll have a lot of good conversation. We'll also open it up for questions to you all, so please keep those questions in mind. And when we get there, first up, I want to introduce the panelists. We have Aravind Bala. Aravind Bala is the co-founder and CTO of SeekOut. SeekOut is a Seattle-based startup. They help with tech recruiting using AI. Aravind spent most of his career building ML and personalization even before AI was a buzzword. And he's worked in large companies and now founded the SeekOut in Seattle. And he's using all of those ML expertise to bring to you all the tech talent you need to go hire. But when he's not CTOing, he moonlights as a mentor for a small startup program for young entrepreneurs through the TIE program. Basically, if you want to learn about entrepreneurship, he's your guy. Next up, we have Meagan Cojocar, who's a GM at Pulumi, also a Seattle-based startup. Meagan, in her day job, is reinventing how developers manage cloud infrastructure. You know, if you've used Pulumi, you know how beautiful and how easy it is to use using programming languages as opposed to whatever this thing YAML is. And in her previous life, Meagan managed database products at AWS, but now at Pulumi, she's championing an open source, developer-first approach to infrastructure. Also, thanks to Meagan, I think she saves our Statsig engineers' sanity on a day-to-day basis. And last but not least, we have Keith Ballinger, who's a tech veteran in the Seattle ecosystem. He now runs the GCP developer org at Google. At Google, he also builds the products for developers, and before Google, he led engineering at GitHub, where he helped build tools and ship tools that developers love. We all love GitHub tools. Before that, he has deep roots in Microsoft and Xamarin. If you all think about Xamarin back in the day, that brings back memories to me. I used to be a Xamarin developer. I love Xamarin. Again, preserving sanity for all those mobile developers. You can blame it on Keith. Thank you, everyone, for being here. We're going to have a lot of conversation about product growth, but I want to kick it off with a spicy topic, all right? The topic is, what is one piece of product growth advice that you constantly get, but you don't agree with? Let's start with Meagan.
I'm on the spot. A spicy take on growth hack. I think something that maybe resonates with others is often you'll get executive guidance of like, let's find a growth hack, like let's growth hack this. And oftentimes you spend a lot of time and energy trying to optimize something that is inherently difficult, otherwise everyone would just do it. But also you might growth hack part of your funnel and then it doesn't actually change conversion. So for example, you might get like a bunch of clicks and then end up not actually impacting your conversion rate at all. And so, or even decreasing your conversion rate and those clicks don't actually go anywhere. And so I think that's maybe the thing that comes out in terms of like, you hear it a lot, but like in industry, it is a little bit like lightning in a bottle, and often you're probably, you know, it's great if it happens, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but like you're probably better off figuring out, okay, how do we measure, how do we A/B test, what's our aha moment, how many, you know, how do we get there, how do we increase that version? And if you do have a successful growth hack, great, but now let's move on to conversion. How do we capture all of this moment in time instead of it being like a blip, effectively? So that would be my quick, spicy take.
Now I'm gonna dig a little bit deeper on that. Like the growth hack, I understand that there's like, when you do the experiments at the shallow level of like low intent versus high intent, and then you're measuring the conversion at the, well, like, you know, the click level versus like, you know, actual revenue or whatever business metrics you're talking about, right? Is that, am I?
Yeah, exactly. Like I think a good example is like, oh, what's the landing page that Auth0 famously did. That's like gwit.io, right, or jwt.io, where it's like something that has nothing to do with necessarily what you would think of I'm going to go to, Auth0 for, but it was like this very useful tool for developers that like got them a ton of clicks effectively. But in isolation, that is not necessarily meaningful to your business. So to your point, that's like low intent, not even necessarily your ICP. That's kind of exactly where I'm getting at with that.
That's awesome. I mean, I heard that there's a tool out there that helps you measure your business impact for your experiments. We'll touch on that later. Okay, I'm going to move on to Keith. Keith, what is your...
Meagan stole my answer. So I think probably what I would say is build an MVP, and while that's correct, I think a lot of people have really focused on the M of minimal, and that's not a great path to success, I have found, both personally and with other people. And so it's really about build a viable product, and build the least amount of the viable product that you need to build. But so many times I'll see people who, well, especially nowadays, they'll vibe code something even. But in the past they built a prototype, maybe using Ruby on Rails or Drupal or something, and get something quickly out that they wanted to kind of test with. But they're not just testing with it; they're trying to launch it and maybe using growth hacking tactics to do it. But they're kind of missing the core point. You need something in your product that's differentiating, that's brings delight to your users, all those kinds of things. And you don't get it unless you've built something that is actually valuable. And so that's the key piece, I think, that's kind of missing.
Would it be minimum valuable product?
I like least effort valuable product.
I like that. All right, Aravind?
I think my advice is ignore all growth hacking advice. I think it's better to just start thinking from first principles, because I can assure you, by the time you read a growth hack in a book, it's too late. It's a waste of time. Everybody has tried it. It's completely saturated. So I think the thing I would say is go back and look at first principles, look to your product and see what is it that's going to get people really excited about your product, and what can you do to drive it, right? Because hacks, there's so much context. It might have worked because something else was true, the market took off, it may have nothing to do with them. When we first started, we were doing a consumer startup. We were trying to raise money and said, okay, we have all this great people on the team, we have all these ideas, we have all these growth hacking ideas, we're going to grow. And we spoke to somebody at Menlo VC, and he said, consumer product, the only thing I want to see is traction, right? Like, there's no correlation between the skill of the founder and the success. Right? And he's like, the most dangerous person to find is a second-time founder who's made it big in consumer, because they actually start believing their skill had something to do with it. So I would say, like, ignore growth hacks, think from first principles. If you hear something interesting, work backwards, see if what was it that actually made it tick, and is there something you could use. But it all depends on your situation. Don't take any advice like it worked for so and so, they grew to 100 million, you should do that. That never works.
Yeah, I mean, I would even go further and say that every great story of a growth hack that we've heard about in Legend, that company, if it was a successful app or service, they would have been successful without that growth hack. I can't think of a single example, actually.
How many people are here from startups? Oh, it's quite a bit. One of the cool things about this panel is everyone has spent quite a bit of time in large companies and then moved on to small startups. Some, like Keith, have gone back to big companies as well, so with the experience of a startup.
Google's a startup. I don't know what you're saying. Small Seattle startup in South Lake Canyon.
That's right. And they're hiring too, right? All right. What is one thing that you, maybe multiple things, but one thing that remains in your mind is like if you had to specifically unlearn from a large company to be successful in a small company? Let's start with Aravind this time.
So this one, I give you like a worthless piece of advice. And it's good advice, it's worthless because it's very difficult to follow. And actually it's a little contradictory to what you were saying. which is, as a product person, you always build more product than you need to test your hypothesis. And I give this advice to everybody. I teach this to my high school students, and I still make the same mistake. Like the last month when I tried to do something, I spent way too much time building the product when I should have just tested whether the thing will work first. And I think it's just like, when you're in a large company, you always think about scale and will this work for 1 million users? And your problem is you probably won't get 10 users, right? So it's just a waste of time thinking about 1 million users. So just focus on what's relevant.
I actually have a hypothesis there, which is like the successful products are always like built with spit and bale wire, because if it's successful, you're always going to patch it to make it work. And the products that you're like, have this pristine, beautiful architecture are the ones that don't have users. Okay, all right. Well, Meagan, your thoughts on this?
I think in terms of like unlearning things from big corporations, I mean, there's a lot of things that you learn, right? Like I come from Amazon, and like the PRFAQ process of how to build products, and even just like WBRs, like weekly business reviews, and articulating what are the most important metrics to your business and being like narrow on that. That's all great. But I think one thing about being in a startup is, let's say you're at a large company and you have 3 like great product ideas that are grounded in real customer pain points. You can just have capacity for all those 3 things, right? But at a startup, you have to choose one. And I think what everyone has to learn in a small environment like that is like ruthless prioritization due to scarcity, but also how to say no. And it's very difficult in this space now where things are changing very quickly. And so you may have said yes to something and committed to it like 2 months ago, and now you're looking at a very different climate, and your customers suddenly have all this excitement about everything AI, and like, here's all the things you can do for me. And so you gotta choose, what you're gonna go after, and a lot of saying no. And that scarcity also breeds creativity and innovation, and that's great, but it's not easy. You can very easily spread yourself very thin and do too much too little. And I think that's challenging.
Okay.
2 things. The first is, at a big company, you learn to go to meetings and to hold meetings and to talk at meetings and to avoid meetings. And at a startup, avoid meetings. Just don't have them. Just talk to each other when you need to. So that's one. But I think the second thing is a lot what Aravind was saying, and you is, and this is a little bit of a story. When I left Microsoft the first time in 2007 or 2008, I did a startup with a group of people, and we were trying to build what you would think of today as a Chromebook. It was like a cheap device that you could just turn on. It would boot directly into a web browser, full screen, so you didn't know you're in a web browser. There was a word processor, spreadsheets, file upload, all the things you'd kind of expect from an OS. And we built it just like I would have built it at Microsoft. It was like a pristine architecture. We had a 3-year roadmap. The whole back end was amazing. I mean, it was such good engineering. But then after a year, we needed to raise more money, and no one wanted to give us money because all we had done was, build this one laptop. And there was no customers, there was no traction. We totally didn't do the bailing wire approach. And that was like that had a huge effect on me for the rest of my startup career. Always, just to your point, build the thing, again, something that's valuable, but in that least effort. If you're not incredibly embarrassed of the architecture, incredibly embarrassed of the code, and you just can't wait to rewrite it, you've done too much. And that's just not how a big company thinks about things.
A little bit to add to that, I think you want to work backwards, and this is very easy advice to give, super hard to follow in practice. I've had very little success following it myself. You want to figure out what's the riskiest part of your hypothesis and figure out the easiest way to test it.
There's a great book actually on this called Risk-Driven Development, and it's all open source on GitHub, and it actually gives a great methodology to do exactly that.
Nice. And one other thing I learned with like the startup is like do unscalable things until you really have a problem, because at that point it's a good problem to have to go figure out how to scale. That's awesome. All right, well, Meagan, you made the mistake of touching on AI. So my next question is going to be on AI. Like, it's on every board deck now. Everybody's talking about it. Every fundraising pitch deck is filled with AI. But let's be honest now, AI doesn't deliver on all contexts, at least not yet. Okay, so where have you tried AI and seen it not work? And in that case, what did you do next? Or what is your advice for people? So let's start with Keith.
So I think this is a non-work context. I like to do filmmaking. I've always, as a hobby, like make short films, things like that. And I've yet to be able to use AI to make a film. And it's getting there. Like, Vijaye now, for instance, can do longer and longer clips, and I'm sure you've seen things on TikTok and YouTube of this. But these multimodal models, using diffusion and things like that to generate video, isn't quite there for like complicated things. So what I've done next is I'll pick the camera back up and use actors and things like that. From a day job kind of point of view, I focus vastly on AI for developers and things like that. And I have to say it's kind of worked pretty well. So yeah, I can think of like experiments we've tried that haven't, but for the most part, I think it's kind of proven to be the most popular and successful application of AI so far.
Coding guys, yeah, definitely. All right, Meagan.
I mean, if we're gonna start with our like non-work example, I mean, why can Siri not do everything for me? It's so frustrating. Like, you have all of this data and yet so incapable of using it or like searching across it. So definitely no success there from my perspective. But work-wise, I mean, Pulumi, we've been basically dabbling in the space as long as we've been able to. I think we shipped our first LLM-enabled feature like a month after OpenAI had an API on Azure. So lots of field experiments similar to what Keith's talking about. But one that maybe comes to mind, which is like both very embarrassing but also educational for everyone, is we had this great idea, which is like, as Vijaye talked about, Pulumi use it to provision cloud infrastructure. So, you might be like, oh, I need a Lambda, and you can write that in Python. That's kind of the main premise of Pulumi. Don't worry, this isn't an ad, it's important context. And so we were like, oh, what would be really helpful is to be able to have a bunch of existing content for the use cases our customers are looking for. So for example, a user's like, how do I create a Cloudflare worker in Pulumi? And then they search for that, and there isn't anything, and then they have to look at docs and write that code net new. And so why don't we use an LLM to like spit out all this content? Now I know what you're thinking, like, probably that content sucked. No, actually, we ended up running like a bunch of test cases around it and making sure all of them passed. So the content was good, but we did like hundreds of thousands of these things. And we had the most unexpected outcome, which is that Google ranked our AI-generated content over the cloud provider's content on that resource. And so suddenly, all of these users who didn't know what Pulumi was, who were looking for help with like AWS Elastic Bean or like some sort of specific resource with some property, Google was ranking our Pulumi code above the documentation for the cloud provider. And so this is kind of an example of a growth hack going really well, and we got like a ridiculous amount of clicks and attention, but it's not really the attention you want, in that developers aren't very patient with when they're looking for information and they find something that's not that. And so, it wasn't getting their user in the information they wanted where they wanted it, and that doesn't serve anyone. And so it's definitely a use case which comes to mind where, AI wasn't great, and not even necessarily because of our doing, but because in this case, the distribution of that content was serving it for us. And we did roll it back and try and help Google categorize it better. I'm not trying to throw you under the bus, but so I think that's one example where, the tool wasn't necessarily the right fit for the job for many circumstances around it. And it would be considered a great growth hack if it got to the right user in the right slot.
I love that example. Actually, it reminds me of the one time when one of the open source projects from Google published a UUID in the sample code, and then everybody used the same UUID in the sample code in their application, and then everybody overwrote each other. That was a fun one. All right, Aravind, what is your take on AI?
Yeah, I have a sorry, a little bit of a longish answer. I have to set the context because what I say will depend on the context. So we've been doing recruiting tools, and that's kind of like the AI, like the co-pilot model, right? You're trying to make somebody better, and when you're selling a feature, right, your goal is to make your user better. They can do things that they can't do with your competitors' product. You're always trying to look for the differentiation. But if you try to do something 10x better, that's not going to work, right? Think of, like how people used to make tables in the past. It was all handmade. You give them power tools, they can do 20, 30% better. You give them great tools, they can make tables better than somebody else. If you want to make it 10x better, you have to build it in a factory. And then the dynamics completely change. You're not trying to differentiate between the tables. You don't want one leg to look better than the other because the person who built that leg was better. You're looking for standardization. The people working in the factory are not building the tables, they're supervising machines that build stuff, right? So I think we believe this is happening to white collar work. Basically to get 10x productivity, people aren't going to be doing the work, they're going to be supervisors of agents that are going to be doing the work. And that's a very, very different mindset. So a lot of what we've been trying to do is to do that in the recruiting space. How do you do 10x better? And then when you build tools, right, like you don't really control the entire workflow, but when you're trying to deliver outcomes, you have to understand every single part of the workflow. And a lot of the workflow has nothing to do with your AI or tools, right, all that stuff, right? Like if you're doing hiring, a big failure is not understanding what the hiring manager wants. Or, a big failure could be, like we had this, we were trying to fill this role and we're saying your AI is not really doing anything here. You look at the role and they've had 228 interviews. Okay, and they've had 10 on-site interviews with 10 interviews each, and 9 people said yes, 1 person said no. And you're like, okay, the problem is not in my sourcing, the problem is in your interview loop. But if you take on outcomes and you're trying to do the job, you have to deal with all the human problems. And I think that's where it's going to be a challenge, right? Like, it's just like today, many of you work in large companies, if I tell you, don't worry about the office politics, don't worry about making your manager look good, you don't need to network, just do your job, right? Like do 10x more, work 24 hours a day and churn out code, you'll win. Like none of you, so that's nonsense advice, right? But when you build an AI engineer and you put it in, if it doesn't play the politics, if it doesn't explain why it's doing a good job, it's not going to succeed either, right? And that's where I think a lot of where we are heading in terms of the white collar work, you have to think very deeply about how you deliver outcomes.
Sorry, can I jump on that? I was just gonna say, it's funny how you're in such a different industry than me, but those parallels all apply. Like in the infrastructure space, no one's trying to vibe code their production Kubernetes cluster, And so it's if an agent writes, all your infrastructure as code or performs all those operations directly, the human role is okay, we need evals for how they do that, or we need some sort of policy that the human's gonna write, and we need approvals and ways to validate and trust, and all that is the same in our SLSC, in our software development process today, but that becomes your role, You are the guardian of that, and that's slightly different than I'm the doer, and then someone else on my team does that review.
This actually reminds me, there's a book called The Goal. I don't know if you've read it, it's from the 70s. There's a kind of software version of it called the Phoenix Project that also came out. And the core concept of both these books is something called constraint theory, which is kind of what Aravind was talking about a little bit earlier, which is there's a workflow, there's a process. And this exists everywhere in the world, whether you're building software or building a house or in a factory building cars. And all of these stages of the process are somewhat independent of each other in terms of how long the whole thing comes, how long the outcome takes. So you can use AI to optimize one step of the process, but if the step right after that isn't also optimized, so there's a bottleneck there, all you're doing is basically, in old factory terms, is you're building up inventory. And you can think about that in the DevOps world, for instance, right? You ship code. Do you ship code all the time? Do you have 12 trains a day, or do you ship maybe every PR goes out? Or do you do it once a day or once a week? Well, if you're doing it once a week, you have a very non-optimized bottleneck in your workflow. And so you could have the best AI coding assistants in the world for your developers. They could be writing 10 times as much code, but you still only have one time that you're actually shipping it. And guess what? You're now shipping a lot more code, and the more code you ship, the more chances are something's not going to work right. You're going to have to spend more time testing it. And so that's like, I think that core insight from that book, I highly recommend it. The goal, it's great. It's just that you have to look at the entire workflow and the entire outcome and all the steps in there, and then apply AI where it works well.
And I think it's tricky because, you know, as the AI moves higher, then you get into potentially job replacement, and then you have to understand the politics of that and figure it out, right? Like you can never. A lot of times, the person who's judging your AI is going to be the person potentially losing their job because of your AI. And trust me, there's no way you can win that, right? So there's just a lot more trying to understand where is the critical path and how do you actually set it up and what's the model, what's the pricing, packaging that will actually allow you.
Yeah, actually.
Can we talk about that?
Yeah, go for it.
Oh, I just love this subject. I actually have a blog post that'll come out soon, I promise. I actually think that we have lots of examples in our industry and before that AI does not lead to job displacement, it leads to job change. So classic example, I'm sure a lot of you have heard, accountants used to use paper, right? And, you know, basically a physical spreadsheet. And then of course Excel came along. Well, are there still accountants? Yes, there are. There's still a lot of accountants, but the nature of their job has changed. And so I don't know every industry, so I can't speak to every industry, but certainly in like our world of software engineering, I have been very close to this since Copilot. I don't see developers going away. I just think that instead of using punch cards and there's someone whose job is literally called Ballinger, that was their title, well, that doesn't exist anymore because that's all automated. But there's still more developers now than there were when there were punch cards. Why? Because we moved up an abstraction level. Because fundamentally, developers are problem solvers. There's some problem that you are going to solve, and you're going to use a toolkit to solve it, which is software in this case. So, well, Aravind may be right about other industries. I can't say for sure. I can't speak to them, but at least in our world, I think it's it's not something to worry about as much.
Go for it. Yeah. I think for developers, after spending a lot of time vibe coding, I think developers are safe for now. But I think the key part is, I think one of the things that's different this time, everything is the same till it's different at some point, is that AI actually is replacing lots of skill sets, right? So if your big skill set is you can read and write and create content, in the past you would say, okay, you can't do marketing, do something else. And now, but the problem is all of those are getting replaced. So the question is, what skill sets would be interesting, right? And I think that, I don't know if this time is the same as before, and I've heard that argument before, but it's unclear to me whether, we are actually replacing human skill sets. And so it's going to be a little tricky as to what.
I love this. I'm going to change the topic a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about customers. Part of the product, you build a product, you want to go talk to customers. So when I started the company Statsig 4.5 years ago, I was told that I should go talk to potential customers, and so which I did. I think I talked to about 100 people, and then my 101st person was Aravind. I was trying to talk to him about hey, I'm gonna go build this thing. It's gonna be awesome. Would you use it? Aravind stopped me on the tracks. He said you're selling it the wrong way. Go read this book, The Mom Test. And then he cut the meeting short. At first I was whoa, shocked. And somebody cut the meeting short and gave me advice about reading a book. But then I went and read the book and I learned so much, and I was so thankful to him for asking me to go read the book. If you haven't read the book, I highly encourage you to go read the book. Now, one of the things that I want to talk about here is what are some things that you should talk to customers about and take their input when you're building products? What are some things that you shouldn't or toss away as you talk to customers? Let's start with you, Aravind.
Yeah, I mean, if you haven't read the Monk Test, it's a great book.
What's the TLDR?
It's essentially don't ask hypothetical questions. Ask them what they actually do. So don't ask them, will you buy my product or stuff like that. You're not going to get any.
Which I did.
You ask them, how are you solving the problem today, and how much effort are they putting in to solve the problem. And if it turns out they're not solving the problem, like move on. They're wasting your time. Right? Yeah, along those lines, I think when you talk to customers, you want to understand their workflow. You want to understand what does success mean to them, how are they solving the problem, and you have to really understand all the change management that goes in. Right? So if you want to bring in something that they have to learn, they have to do something different, that's always very tricky, so you have to plan for that. So understand how do they solve stuff first, and don't ask hypothetical questions. They're always a waste of time. Don't say, if I did this, will you buy it? All that kind of, those are all complete waste of time. But understand what makes them tick, what do they do today, how do they solve their problems, and like what parts of their problem then can you actually solve.
I mean, I have a PM background, so I have the philosophy you can never talk to customers enough. So like always, constantly, for any reason, which is probably not the most time effective. It's funny that you mentioned Aravind being the 101 customer, because I recently pulled in the last year how many customer calls I've done, and it's been exactly 100. So I was like, you stole my number. But I can't do it enough, and it's things like this, staying close to the workflow, understanding how your product's being used, what use cases are resonating, but also like, I've never heard of the mom test, but I love that, because right now, Pulumi's trying to do, same as every company I assume, like, what can we automate for you is like a big theme of what we're building. And so I just meet with customers, I'm like, what's the most painful thing that you do right now? And they walk me through it, like, yeah, I'm having to do all these like provider upgrades across hundreds of repos, and this is what it looks like, and this is why it's painful. All those repos are owned by different teams, and like, to your point, there's a lot of human challenges that automation cannot help with immediately. But I honestly always index on the customer voice, being like, what drives you? It's maybe not the most time effective, because obviously, 100 hours, but some of the things that you can do for Signal, or I would say the areas where customer feedback doesn't make sense is no customer is going to tell you if they tried your thing and it sucked. Like, yeah, if you ask them directly about it, oh, did you like using this thing? They might say like, oh, it's not great. But like, if they try out some experience and fall down, no one's going to like raise their hand and let you know, right? They're just never going to use it again. And so a lot of data of, drop off and all those things is how you drive those. And within the LLM context or within AI enabled features, obviously we've standardized on like the thumbs up, thumbs down. I have no idea, I mean, you probably know how that's used and what it actually goes to, but we need some sort of like immediate signal in our data so that it's not, someone has to do the onus is not on them. And I'm very fortunate that I work in an open source space, so we get like inundated with customer GitHub issues all the time, which is great. But even opening a GitHub issue is work. And so we try and rely on like also some small signal where we're putting the responsibility on us, not on the customer. But I always index for customer feedback.
I also happen to know a tool that can collect telemetry. So what are some things that you wouldn't take from the customers? And I know you touched on the things that you would take from the customers. Are there things that you would ignore or not ask?
Well, I think the main thing I was trying to get at is just like, there's a lot of things customers won't tell you that you still need to know to like build a great product. But in terms of what not to take from customers, I think it's just like guiding the conversation in what is the actual pain. And it's very easy to meet with a customer and they say, hey, we have this solution we want you to build. And that's so often how it works working with developers as your user base, is they know in their mind, they've already designed the feature that they want. And you often have to like narrow down to like, okay, what is the specific thing that is blocking you? Because a lot of customers will have that exact same thing, but they all describe it differently because they're projecting what they think it should look like. And like, I work in a very technical space, they have it figured out down to like the line of code we should change. And so there's all different layers of abstraction, but I think getting at the root is what's been most helpful for solving themes of customer issues instead of a laundry list of, I'm gonna go build what they told me.
Makes sense.
Keith? I'll say something really controversial, and I'll split it into two pieces there. there's when you're building a product from scratch, like you're building the first version of a product, and then there's when you have a product in market and you're looking to iterate on it and all those kinds of things. In the first case, don't talk to customers before you build it. Build something that you like, that delights you, that you're passionate about, that you have knowledge of. And if you happen to be trying to target an industry where you don't have any of that, ask yourself why you're spending half your life building something that you don't have a passion for and expertise in and knowledge in. That's life advice, sorry. Did the philosophy there. But, and I mean, I have many examples of this. Like when we built Copilot at GitHub, we did not talk to customers when we were building Copilot. We were our own customer. We knew what we wanted. Recently at Google, when we built the Gemini CLI, we did not talk to a bunch of customers about what they wanted to see and how to solve it. We just built it. We knew what we wanted. And now, with those products, once they were in market, then the less controversial thing is, Meagan was saying exactly, ruthlessly talk to customers. Talk to customers all the time. Get all the data you can from them, and just have a really great way of parsing out the noise, which, by the way, AI is great for. I'm sure what Statsig does, but even the Gemini CLI that we use today, we literally have it go through and look at all the issues and pull requests that people file in the OSS repo. Excuse me. And we have it categorize it and tell us how severe they are, or moderate, or which ones are duplicates and all those kinds of things. So you can actually use AI for that, but get as much customer signal then as you can. But to the point that Aravind was making earlier, I think around the mom test in particular, Meagan was also making it, is that don't ask them what they want, just watch them do what they're doing. And in whatever way you can, right? And at Microsoft, actually, the second time I was there was an amazing user research lab that did this. They would bring in, and it was in dev, so it was all developers. They'd bring in developers, they'd put them in a room, they'd record them, and they'd ask them to do something. And you'd get a recording of them, whatever, using Visual Studio Code to write a Python app, or using Azure DevOps to deploy code to a container. And just watching your application actually being used was by far the highest signal I ever saw.
To add to that, I mean, if in the early days, when you're doing a startup, you talk to somebody and you ask them about a problem, and they actually tell you they researched the head out of the problem, they tried different solutions, didn't work, they ended up hiring somebody, they have a duct tape solution. That's a gold mine. That's a great problem for you to solve, right? So I think it's about picking the right problem. That's the best thing you can do. If you pick the right problem, then that's like probably half the battle. The other thing I'd say is in terms of people will tell you a lot of feature requests, and especially in the early days when you have a mature product, yes, absolutely. They know what they're talking about, you should obviously listen to them. In the early days, don't listen to feature requests as is, just because your biggest customer asks you to build something. Understand what is it they're trying to do, why do they want that. You might find that they're just doing something that you didn't expect, or they're not even doing it right, and you might just end up building a lot of random features.
I have a question to the panel. I totally agree with what Keith's saying, and that makes sense, especially in the developer space, because developers are highly critical, very opinionated, go build what you would want to use. But I'm wondering, now in the tools that we have to do deep research, are there ways to do upfront better product research, even in the 0 to 1 phase? So hey, our LLMs can summarize everything ever said on Reddit. So is there ways to bring in a crowdsourcing of information that we didn't have before? That's a lot lower weight than going and meeting with a bunch of customers. I'm just thinking out loud here. But.
No, I do this all the time, actually. For some reason I use AI Studio versus the Gemini app, for instance, but I constantly will have ideas and literally do exactly this thing. I'll say, I want you to do deep research on this topic, I want to know everything about it, and then I want you to give me 10 ideas or whatever. Recently, I'm obsessed with the idea of a new programming language that's designed for LLMs, not for humans to read. And so because why not? And so the first thing I did was I had AI Studio and Gemini Pro go off and just do tons of deep research on, what programming languages LLMs work best with, and what attributes of those languages work well, and what people say about them, and all those kinds of things. And I think you're actually hitting, I think, a huge point, which is the capability to do research and to synthesize it is enormous. It's vast versus where we were 2 years ago. And everybody should be taking advantage of that all the time. And not worry about their job being taken because they're not going and scrolling all of Reddit, but because the LLM's doing it for them and they still have a job.
Yeah, I completely agree. I use deep research for everything. I was, in this case, being like, how can you do like almost sentiment analysis of what problems exist to what to go after? But like in the space of, you know, you have an existing problem and you are figuring out solutions, like totally agree. Or even just like understanding the competitive landscape. And that's not even necessarily your competitors, but like, hey, I'm trying to solve a problem where like we need to run something in a customer's cloud and compute. Like a lot of other businesses have this problem. And so like go do a competitive analysis of every way they've done it. What are the trade-offs? Like, I love it for this.
I've done this a lot with pricing and packaging, because like, you know, I know what my industry does for pricing and packaging, so all the times I do deep research and say, this is how my industry works, and these are the pricing things that work now. What are other industries that I'm not thinking about where they're doing something unique and clever in a different way? And I always get very fascinating ideas, and it's so worth it.
Sorry, can I say one more very quick
Yeah,
thing?
please.
It's interesting, my engineers were telling me like now that we have these more asynchronous agent workflows where you might say, hey, go update like all of my code base to do a refactor. It's like this long running task that takes a while, whereas previously we're used to this like ChatGPT or like in your IDE model where you get immediate feedback. And they're saying like, I feel like I'm developing like attention issues because it'll take like an hour. And so I'm like, what do I do for that hour? And then I go start something else and I forget about the 1 hour. And they were asking me about it because I'm like known as being like way too far on the spectrum of doing everything with AI. And I was like, oh, well, PM said this a long time ago with deep research. And I really like, sorry to talk about it better, but ChatGPT's has like a, it's probably not healthy for work-life balance, but has like a status of your deep research job on like a fixed notification on your phone. And so every time you go to like check Slack or something, you're like, oh, it's almost done. Like, all right, in the next 5 minutes, I should be able to review that. But there is an interesting like human interaction challenge here, which is like, if we are sending tasks to agents all over the place, what does our workflow look like? And like, how do we maintain that like attention? And I don't know how you're dealing with this if you're doing a lot of these, but you kind of have to like go back to this thing you were working on once it finishes its task and then start over.
Well, the blog post I mentioned earlier is the title will be something like, developers are turning into conductors, and that's my mental model. You're conducting an orchestra, and if you look at like how a band leader, a conductor, does things, he is multitasking, or they are multitasking. They are, thinking about what the trumpets are doing right now. They're thinking about what the strings are. They're thinking about, okay, what are the, what's that oboist about to do? They are dealing with the complexity in their head. And they're doing it very successfully, and they're creating art. And that's okay. I think we have this idea today that multitasking is bad and you have to single task. The reality is you have to focus. And focus is different than single tasking and multitasking. And so I will, like when I code, I'll spin up lots of AI assistants doing different things at once. I'll do a couple of different research things, but they're all in the same thematic topic. I'm conducting an orchestra to get to some solution. And so, of course, you need some kind of notification and status to, to go back between things. But I find that that's where it is. It's like focus on a problem, but then you can have different players in your orchestra doing things.
Almost like a team,
Yes, exactly. So it's kind of like management.
Nice. All right, I'm going to switch over to audience questions. We have about 10 minutes left, right? So let's see how many we can squeeze in. Who wants to ask the first question? Put up your hand and we'll bring a microphone. All right, one in the back.
Hello. My name is Hardy. Nice to meet you guys. I have a question for the panel. What are your general thoughts about embracing AI? Do you guys feel bullish about it? Like this is the answer to all our questions, manufacturing, processing, making everything cost effective? Or do you guys believe it is the boogeyman who's going to take, who's got job responsibilities, job positions, become Skynet and just destroy the world? What's your general thoughts about it? Like, should we open the Pandora's box or should we keep it sealed?
42.
Yeah, I'm super bullish about AI in terms of all the good that it can bring in. And you can kind of see it can already do a lot of white-collar jobs. I don't know what's going to happen, like in terms of the job market. And one of the things, like when I I teach a class for high school students, and it's always like, what degree should you do? Or people always have questions on what should I be learning. And I think obviously learning how to think and direct stuff and be clear about what you want, all of those things are still going to be super valuable. I don't think AI is going to become sentient and take over or something like that. Even if you look at again, I'm not an expert, but there's these two schools of thought. One is, AI will continuously get better, but all you see is that it does something extremely brilliantly and sometimes extremely stupid, and it can happen right next to each other, right? Like if you've done vibe coding, you kind of know this. Sometimes it'll write beautiful code, and then you ask it to add a button, and then it rewrites everything with junk, and you're like, what the heck happened? And I don't know if it's inherently solvable and how much will go. I think it'll get better. Yeah, it is. There's definitely unknown in terms of what it means for society.
I don't know if it's going to become Skynet, but it will have so much of my data, it's not even funny. So I hope not. But I think I'm very bullish as well. I definitely agree. There's a lot of use cases that work well. Obviously, you need a lot of good context for it to work well, and it depends on the use case. I think when LLMs first came out, a lot of developer and also just generic consumer product experiences were like, oh, we're gonna use this LLM and it'll also have our internal data, and that was everyone's use case. And now with agent-to-agent protocols or MCPs, we're at a place where that is not your moat, right? Your moat is not, we will give you an LLM baked in our product that also has some information. And so I think I'm not bullish on everyone tacking it onto things, and I'm sure we can all attest to there's been a lot of AI experiences that are not great. Customer support bots lately have been very infuriating. But you can imagine that for companies that have that differentiation, they have a moat, which Pulumi's example, just to be concrete, is we know about all of your infrastructure and its dependencies on each other and how you normally do things, what your best practices are. And so you can give code generation or policy or issue remediation advice that's grounded in how do you do things in your company, right? And how do you do that best? And that's very unique context, and that's not necessarily context that you would want spread all over the place, right? It's very specific and private to your organization. But I think there's going to be a lot of that, right? There's going to be a lot of these AI wash things, and there already is. But wherever people have something unique, they have a moat, they have an integration point that you require that for. And I can think of a lot of good examples in observability, Honeycomb, what they're doing with their MCP. All of our developers are using way more observability because it's in their IDE now. They can ask it questions, which brings up the value of their platform generally. So I think all of that I'm very bullish on in terms of the product growth avenue of these things.
And it's an interesting question. It's a philosophical question in the end, and so I'll give you a philosophical answer, which is, so I'm in this industry. I'm a developer both because I like to do it, I like to code, but also because I have a long-term vision of the future that I'd like to see happen. And that long-term vision of the future is that no one has to work to live. I think that it's kind of a human rights violation, in fact, that you have to have a job to survive. And so, thank you. So technological progress for me is the way to make that happen, is the key to making that happen. And I deeply believe in a long enough time horizon, and so it's not next year, it's not 5 years from now, maybe it's 10 or more, that AI is going to be the key innovation, along with, I would say, the internet and mobile computing, that will enable us to have a world where we can see our needs taken care of, and we can explore the things and do the things we want to do. So your job will be to solve the problems that you want to solve, to make the art that you want to make. And so, it sounds like we're all kind of bullish and techno-optimists. I'm like the extreme version of that, where in some ways I would say AI is the last best hope for our society to achieve these things. And it's something I just deeply believe.
Nice. All right, who's next? Olaf. Let's go with you over there, back.
Okay, so my question is, I'm on the My question is on the technical side of things, but the way I see things going within the AI space is that the barriers are not necessarily on the technical side, but on the business side with business process innovation and new ways of distribution for the tech. Because, for example, in private equity and whatnot, because even if we develop the tech, we are kind of on the cutting edge, and the business side with distribution seems to be lagging a little bit behind. Have you guys seen sort of some of the possible innovation, and as a kind of a challenge to the business community, maybe to think about some ways to be able to distribute this new kind of ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, you mean specifically with AI, right? Yeah.
Yes, because a lot of technology, especially horizontal technology, unblocks verticals.
And so there's Satya Nadella has a saying where he says agents are the next SaaS. And I think the world that I think is happening that probably applies to what you're saying is that there are going to be AI agents that can do things well, that can compose well together with other AI agents to solve problems. And the distribution, the discovery, the acquisition, the way you pay for them, the way you authenticate them, all of those kinds of things. There'll be a whole ecosystem around those. And then you'll see things like products from Google, products from Microsoft, products from startups that either allow you to orchestrate those agents together. And you'll also see startups that come into play who build those agents and deliver them. And then you'll see marketplaces and all those kinds of things. But I think that agents is going to be that new distribution form, and the way those agents, how you find them.
I have a slightly different take on your question. So I don't know if it's exactly what you meant, but one of the things I heard is you were like, how do we move this into business processes? Because that is something that isn't necessarily, evolutionizing, if that's a good word, at the same rate as within, software development. And one of the concepts that I think has been going around that seems really promising is this concept of like an automation engineer, where like your job is you go sit within a business unit and figure out how you can automate parts of their job. And like, I think in our startup, but also just like, anecdotally talking to friends, that seems like a very good model, because you need to understand the domain, right? In order to like bring in an agent and see what use cases make sense and what things you can speed up and what things are the bottlenecks and whatnot. And it's probably not going to happen overnight that it's like, here's this product, click agent, and it will do your hardest task or your longest running task. But having someone embedded who's now building, I really believe that we're moving to more personalized software. You can vibe code all these things, so you can you can develop things a lot faster, and so you can personalize it. And so building some personalization, whether it's like prompts on an agent or whatever it looks like, for specific business units, seems like a way internally we start to bring business processes along with the innovation of tech, because you still need to understand that domain. It's not like that's going to go away, is my thought on it.
Yeah, and the thing that you're describing is basically the Palantir forward deployed engineer model, and I think that's going to be the model for vertical AI, right? Like where you have somebody who goes in, deeply understands the workflow, builds a custom solution, and we're going to need a lot of experimentation to figure out what the pricing model is going to be and those kinds of things. Because at that point, you're kind of, it's more equivalent to paying a person, right? So then it's also more interesting, because then you get into the salary budget versus the tools budget. But I think there's going to be a lot of learning. I don't think anybody's actually figured out that yet, but the model is probably closer to the services model, the forward deployed engineer model, than the tools SaaS model.
All right, who's next?
Yeah, I want to ask a question. My name is Alejandro, by the way, really, and thank you for your time being on this panel. I wanted to ask a question that pulls together a little bit of the growth hacking with a little bit of this world where we have agents interacting with each other. So specifically, like today, most users of your products are humans, so you can go and understand their intent and what's driving their workflow and their actions. And from that, you can measure specific things. We have pretty standard metrics for those. How are you thinking about growth hacking in the context where most of the interactions are agent to agent? How would someone draw the intuitions or put themselves in the shoes of the agent to understand how to improve the software? Are we just going to have an agent figure that out for us, or are us as humans and PMs going to come up with new metrics to measure growth of those experiments or success. And if you have ideas on those metrics, it'd be interesting to hear your take on that.
I can start. Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot lately. Like, what are the metrics of success in that world? It's probably like time saved, right? Becomes a metric for the person, that is your customer today. Or things like, how many times did you find success with what you asked the agent to do? And that's very hard to measure, but like an important metric. I do think what's interesting about what you're talking about though is like, how I've been thinking about building agentic product features is that everything an agent can do, a user should be able to do. And so I'm finding that there's a lot of use cases where we're like, probably our product should have this for users as well, as we're running into with agents. And similarly, a lot of these CLI tools will sometimes hallucinate an API endpoint, and you're like, oh, that actually is probably how it should work, because they're generalizing it based on how things are often done, and you often get very caught in your use case that's very narrow. So it's actually fascinating trying to build product for an agent, because you learn, one, what the agent thinks your product should do, which is actually an interesting signal. Two, things your users should be able to do already that you're now getting tested with by having this agentic workflow. And then just like three, this new, as you're talking about, like theme of metrics, which like I definitely don't have nailed down, but I'm starting to think about it as like, what is the ultimate goal that our customers trying to get out of it? And it's often time saved, like in our case, it's like compliance, so how do you measure that? And then like, did you find success? Did you achieve the thing that you set out when you kicked off this workflow?
I mean, today if you're selling a tool and you have your users using it, your goal is to make your users look good and get them promoted. If you have agents that are going to do that, your goal is to make sure that whoever bought your solution is going to get promoted. So find out what their metric is, and that's basically what you have to work on.
I love it. At the end of the day, you're just making your customers get promoted. I love it.
And I would say,
If you're selling to enterprises.
I would say you can actually look at other analogs to help with this too. So there are many businesses like, Auth0 or Stripe or whatnot that they've built APIs, and they're fundamentally selling an API. And that API, of course, is not directly being interacted with by a human. And in the agent world, there's two kinds of agents you're going to see, essentially. You're going to see agents that are likely in some kind of conversational or pseudo-conversational UI that a human directly interacts with. And then you're going to see agents that are like an API that other pieces of code, oftentimes other agents are going to interact with. And you have to take those two differently. So yeah, customer success, time to value, all of those kinds of things are very important when it's a human interacting directly with an agent. But when it's an agent that you're providing that people are interacting with, like they interact with the Stripe API, go look at what Stripe's done. And go look at what SendGrid's done. All these companies that have done this, where there's a different set of metrics that you care about, and you'll want to understand those because someone somewhere is either directly coding to that agent that you've provided, or they're having their agent interact with it. And you'll have to think through, okay, what are those models of adoption and usage and success, and what do they look like?
All right, that's all the time we have for today. Please give it up for our panelists. I have a couple announcements. First of all, thank you so much for coming in today and participating with our panel. I want to call out Morgan and Sammy, who you might have seen as you checked in. They were responsible for putting this together, so could you give a round of applause?